rain still in the fog. I guess a quick administerial question here, Mr. Albert. Good afternoon. How are we looking for a quorum?
Good afternoon, Mark. We have a quorum. I've started recording, and I just need to say something at the top, if you don't mind, related to making a record from this meeting.
Please go right ahead.
Now that we're receiving services from DAS IT, there will be captions that will accompany any video we post. Excuse me. But they're pretty bare bones, and it's hard to identify who's talking. So I would ask that every time people talk, please say your name, which I did not just do just now. This is Todd Albert.
Well, this is Mark Landauer, and that's going to be a challenge, I'm sure, for everybody. We'll do our best to accommodate the closed captioning and so forth. I guess I don't have an agenda right in front of me, Todd. Forgive me for not having one.
I'll drop it in the link. And actually, sorry, Mark, I need to say one more thing, if that's okay, related to all this.
Mr. Albert, please go ahead.
Okay, well, this is Todd, and Tony Hernandez is meant to keep our minutes for this meeting as the secretary. If he does not appear, I'm going to recommend or even make a motion that somebody else volunteer to do so for today's meeting. Here's the agenda in the chat.
Okay, I'm pulling that. This is Mark Landauer. I'm mumbling to myself. So the first item of business, but before we do so, I do think that in the event that Mr. Hernandez is unable to join us today, can I ask for a volunteer to keep meeting minutes, despite the fact that we have this recorded as well? If you
sure, I'll take minutes.
Emily, thank you. I was going to get to the point where we were going to have a voluntold candidate, and so we won't have to cross that point. So at this point, in following the agenda, we need to approve the council's meeting minutes from our last meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, although I apologize for not reminding everybody and sending them out to you again. They're posted under the last meeting.
Then perhaps, Todd, if those were not put out in advance enough and individuals of the council weren't able to review them, perhaps we need to delay the approval of the last meeting minutes and push that forward unless the members of the council are comfortable adopting the previous minutes. I can go either way. Would just want to get the council's preference at this point.
This is Steve Suo. I move we approve the minutes.
Motion has been made to approve the minutes. Do I hear a second?
This is Todd. I second.
The approval of the minutes have been seconded. All in favor, please indicate your support by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say, please voice your opposition. And hearing none, the meeting minutes are now approved. Before we get to motions from the council members to add additional agenda items, I thought I would take a brief moment here to let our new members of the council introduce themselves. Todd, I'm not sure if my timing is correct, but I believe the full Senate has either in the process or have approved all the executive nominees at this point. As a result, I believe we may have two new members on the council. I would like to give them an opportunity to just briefly introduce themselves to the full council and to the public, if that makes sense. and then we can proceed with our agenda. So Todd, I will perhaps hand it over to you to introduce our two new members of the PRAC to the full PRAC. And Scott and Emily, if you wouldn't just mind taking a moment or two to just sort of tell us a little bit about yourselves, your background, and I'd like to personally welcome you to the PRAC. Thank you.
Well, thanks. This is Todd. I will rely on all of you to say if you are Senate confirmed as of yet, because I did not have an opportunity to check, but I'm sure you will answer in good faith. I just wanted to also say welcome. Looking forward to working with both of you. And so Emily Gothard, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, please? You are our newest representative of the public sector workforce.
This is Emily Gothard, and I don't believe that we are Senate confirmed yet. We had our Senate Rules Committee hearing yesterday, but I don't think that the full vote of the Senate has occurred yet. But I can go ahead and proceed with introducing myself. I'm Emily Gothard. I am a paralegal for SEIU Local 503, which is the largest public employee union in Oregon. I have worked as a paralegal for about 10 years. I also previously worked as a paralegal at Portland State University.
Welcome, Emily.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and assuming all goes well in the Senate, Scott Stauffer will be our representative of cities. So hello, welcome.
Howdy, everybody. Good to be with you. Good to see you. I thought I read somewhere that the Senate might take it up tomorrow in terms of a vote, so soon. But Scott Stauffer representing the cities. I am the city recorder for the city of Milwaukee, which is just south of Portland in Clackamas County. I've been the recorder since 2016. Grew up in North Portland and just kind of made my way south here to Milwaukee, where I live. My role at the city is clerk of the city council, city elections officer, supervisor of the municipal court, and the records program manager. And my experience working in public records, besides on behalf of the city responding to public records requests and managing that program, is I've been a member and chair of the Oregon Association of Municipal Recorders Records Management Committee, which is an amazing group of folks from across our state, of the folks in local government who deal a lot with these records requests. And it's been our great fortune from that perspective to build really good relationships with our colleagues at state archives when it comes to revising the Oregon administrative rules for the city's general retention schedule, and with the Public Records Advocates Council, Public Records, Todd's office, sorry, tongue-tied, both having known Todd for a few years now and several of his predecessors. So it's been great to build that relationship, and I'm honored to have been asked to apply for this position, and I hope I can do justice to my colleagues in the cities who range from city of Portland, pretty big size agency, all the way to the city of Waterloo and Halsey and Halfway and some of these other communities that have communities of 200 people and probably one and a half people at City Hall total. So pleasure to be here and look forward to working with all of you.
Yeah, Scott, I think the city of Echo has a total population of 2, so you've got the whole gambit. Welcome, Scott. And before we proceed, I also want to just take the liberty as the chair to acknowledge Representative Power, who is here with us today as well. Some of you probably know that Representative Power has served on the PRAC since its inception. And we've enjoyed and treasured her participation and her thoughtful guidance and support. She had announced previously that she will not be seeking re-election, and so her time with us is limited. But I did want to acknowledge Representative Power, who is with us today, and just welcome you, Representative. Before we continue, of course, I need to hand over the microphone to share any thoughtful remarks that you may have for us. Thank you.
I would say you're being upgraded. The membership on this council is being upgraded by the participation of Scott instead of me. So we're doing a 1-for-1 Milwaukee replacement. No, actually, my entire family has COVID right now, so I empathize. So I'm going to be largely off camera and on mute so I don't cough at you all for the rest of the time. Daycare exposure. But it's been a lot of fun learning from you all and tussling over public records laws.
Well, I'm sorry that you have, and your family has COVID. My family had it last week, Representative, and it takes a little while to get through it, but I'm glad to hear that you seem to all be at least somewhat healthy, and we're glad that you could join us today. So thank you very much. All right, so I don't think there are any other announcements that the chair necessarily wants to make, so I'm going to open it up to members of the council for motions from members to add any additional agenda items. All right, hearing none, we will continue with our agenda and move on to the, well, we approved, I'm sorry, I think I replaced number 3 with number 1. I suppose we need to approve the agenda because we already approved the minutes, Todd. So motion to approve the agenda, seeing as though we have no additions to be added.
I'll make that motion. This is Todd.
Can I get a second, please?
This is Michael.
This is
Can
Steve.
I both second the motion and ask whether such a motion is really required at all?
At this point, yeah. We can just go pro forma and just continue with the agenda, Michael. Fair enough. Don't need to do it. Okay, next agenda item. We are on number 4, plan annual meetings. Todd, is this a topic that you were going to take on? As I catch you with a mouthful and drinking.
Yes, just as soon as I eat a little bit of lunch. Yeah, so Mark, this idea came about during my brief time as the chair of the PRAC and just trying to help us move forward with our work. You know, we had a very large meeting last October when we were all together and we set our agenda for the next year, created subcommittees. And even though we are statutorily required to meet every 6 months, hence twice a year, I do think we should have an annual meeting, which, you know, could very well be one of our statutorily required meetings where we sort of look back and look forward definitively. Like the point of that meeting is to come together, assess the work that has occurred so far, and figure out what are our next steps, either complete that work or move on to the next thing as a specific agenda item, I guess you could say, almost along the lines of having an annual retreat or how auditors get together annually and pick their work for the next year, something along those lines. And some of you probably have more experience with this type of thing than I do, but I think it's necessary to have that sort of check-in with each other on a yearly basis.
Discussion. Well, I, for one, think it's a grand idea and would hope that we could do this type of meeting. Todd, can I ask a question? Timing of this annual meeting. Needless to say, this is, I believe this is the first full PRAC meeting for 2022. With that understanding, we have, well, we're statutorily required, I believe, to have at least one more meeting this year. I suspect we'll have a couple more than just one. Nevertheless, the timing of this meeting, did you have a date or time in mind when you would like to conduct this?
It's Todd. That's what I think we need to hear from everybody about. It'd be easy to say, let's do this October, since we did last October when we sort of set up this current form of the PRAC, but there could be other considerations, including related to the legislature and everything else that might affect when we want to meet. I kind of like the notion of an end of year meeting, but I'd love to hear what everybody thinks based on their experience.
This is Steve. I have a question. One issue, I guess, is sort of continuity of membership, and I don't recall, does anybody know if terms run from date of confirmation 4 years, or is it based on a specific, like are Emily and Scott filling out another term, or will they have 4 years from tomorrow?
That's a good question. I don't know if we know the answer to that.
I think we're going to have to look at the statute, aren't we?
Well, I can do that while we're talking, but I think if it does run on the calendar year, then maybe it makes sense to, well, confirmation never really quite follows that anyway. So maybe there's really nothing. Maybe there's no point in trying to schedule around that. Yeah, so for that reason, maybe end of year makes, I mean, it seems like a good bookend for looking at the year ahead.
This is Michael, just while we're having open discussion, I guess. I think especially given that we are frequently going to be wanting to talk about legislation for an upcoming session as the year end approaches, I think it might help to, I guess, first to decide whether this is the meeting where we would envision that the PrAC will sort of have a final vote on legislative concepts that are being developed through our subcommittees, processes, and otherwise. And second, if that annual meeting would be those kind of important votes are happening, it would be useful to be thinking about like what deadlines are for the upcoming session. I believe there are some in November. I know some agencies are as early as like this month and July, but I don't know that those necessarily apply to us. So I guess it would just be helpful to me first to know whether we should be thinking about this meeting in the context of proposed legislation or not. And then if we should, what does that mean in terms of deadlines that we should be thinking about?
Well, I put my hand up first, and just quickly to respond, Michael, I've got the legislative calendar in front of me at this time. Key dates that we need to be aware of as the council for pre-session filed bills, and there's some inside baseball to this, but what that means is pre-session filed bills are bills that typically get printed on the first couple of days during session. So if you have a bill that you want to have ready to move right out of the gate, you need to have those bills submitted to Legislative Council through a designated requester, and the only designated requesters are legislators and professional committee staff on behalf of a chair of a committee. As a result, we would need to get any legislative proposals that we want in for pre-session filing by September 23rd. The filing deadline for those pre-session filed bills will be December 21st. So as I said, if you want that bill to be actually printed and ready to go, say within the first week of the session, we would need to file that bill by December 21st with either the chief clerk or the secretary of the Senate. That doesn't mean that there are other bills or that we could request a bill at a later time, but it would mean that we would have to secure the permission of a legislator to get that bill introduced. We'd have to do it regardless, but again, it's sort of an extra step, if you will. Emily.
Sorry, unmuting. Sorry, can you just explain the difference between the September 23rd date and the December 21st date again, Mark? Thank you.
Sorry, this is Mark, by the way, closed captioning. A requester of a bill who wants a bill to be printed and ready to go that first day of session or the first week of session, you must turn in your legislative concept to Legislative Council by September 23rd. Legislative Council will return that concept back to the requester, actually December 5th. The requester then, if they want that bill actually printed and ready to go, must pre-session file that concept or actually the actual legislative draft with the Secretary of the Senate or the Chief Clerk of the House by December 21st. I hope that that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that it was just a legislative concept in September. Thank you. And this is Emily.
I sort of have a reaction. I do think that we may want to consider having this, what have we done and what are we going to do meeting of the full PrAC. I don't really know how to characterize this meeting. I do think it makes sense to have it perhaps later in the year. Perhaps not during legislative session. I do think that many of us will be consumed not only with the session, but we will also have likely a number of bills that we may want to discuss. And so in order to really focus on the internal operations and work that the PrAC does, I do think we want to avoid having it conflicting with a legislative session. So that's my personal bias because I will be consumed. But I also understand other people may have a differing opinion and want to encourage those and welcome them. But I do think we will be pretty distracted during session. And so I think later in the year is probably the most appropriate time. Further discussion. Todd.
Yes, this is Todd. Well, barring any other obstructions, then I kind of like October because it's past summer when a lot of us are going to be away. October is a pretty average month where there's not a lot going on, and it might be a good time to assess where we're at. And plus, any issues related to the legislature coming up could be addressed then as well.
And we have the added benefit of no legislative days during October. Steve.
I wanted to yield to Emily, who had her hand up earlier than me, but I will go after her.
Forgive me, Emily.
Yeah, sorry. It was just about that clarification on the legislative concepts. Thank you, Steve. I guess I need to lower my hand. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is Steve. I was just thinking, Mark, you alluded to additional meetings of the PrAC, and I do think this year anyway, assuming that the subcommittee is successful in coming forward with a proposal for the full PrAC, that there probably will be like full meetings, maybe extending into October, that will be deliberating on that concept. And I think that's probably different from what you want, in terms of the high level, what's next. So, and at least for this year, maybe later, a little bit later in the calendar would be better for the annual, I'll call it a retreat.
I like that, the retreat. I tend to agree with you, Steve. I think we're going to really need to roll our sleeves up in the upcoming months. There's going to be a lot of discussion that needs to take place. We're going to need to have a lot of public comment. I don't know if we're going to necessarily be successful in achieving a consensus by September 23rd. That would certainly be my hope. But I also don't believe that we're necessarily bound by September 23rd to reach a consensus. But I do feel that we will need to have something in the pipeline that if our discussions have not been completed and fully fruitful, we'll need a placeholder available with the hope that we can reach some kind of consensus or at least near consensus. That's my thinking anyway. And so I believe that you're correct in having this retreat, if you will, later in the year does make sense, and we may want to reserve October for additional discussions regarding our legislative concepts. But again, we just don't know where we're going to land in this effort to reform costs for public records, and whether we can strike a a consensus quickly or not obviously remains to be seen. Obviously, it's my hope and desire to reach that hopeful full consensus. So with that, Todd, does that kind of give you the information you wanted? I like the idea of a retreat. I do think it's important for us to, well, I'll have a treat too. Emily.
Yeah, definitely treats at retreats. It's sounding to me like for this year, we should, since we're clear already that a lot of our work is going to be, trying to reach consensus and hammer out a proposal on costs, that's clear that will need some attention, not just in the fall, but over the summer. It may be that this year, and we can change this every year potentially, that this year we should aim for a like a look back, look ahead. I don't know. October seems maybe a little too early, and then there's nothing for stopping us from having a different time. Setting a different time next June, for example. There's something else I wanted to say, but I think that's all really. I did want to ask for the non-legislative subcommittee. I mean, I don't know that timing makes any difference at all to work that's going on there, but Todd, maybe you have a comment as the chair of that subcommittee.
Well, it's Todd. Yeah, I don't think we're not on the same kind of timetable because we're trying to create a different type of product that's not tied to the legislative session, at least not with the work that we're currently doing. How about this? What if we break this discussion up into two different things? One is, do we just like the idea and want to enshrine the idea of an annual meeting where we do sort of what was discussed? And then two, we figure out a date at some point along the way. Like, do we just want to have an annual meeting based on what we've discussed? And if so, then we can work out the date.
This is Mark. My view of that is a yes. We do want to have that treat with the retreat. Let's put this in. Oh, Emily, you have your hand up. Okay. I'd like to field a motion. I would like to have a retreat of the PrAC either October, November, or December, depending on our discussions of the subcommittee of the legislative subcommittee. Obviously, we've got our work ahead of us, but I do think that it's important that we reflect on what we've done and that we plan for future endeavors. I do think, Todd, my belief is we haven't done a survey of the state or for local governments in a good number of years on their response rates. That's something that I think is something we should probably be trying to do once every year or two. It's been quite some time since we did that. I know that our previous advocate conducted one of those very early, and I think it's important that we continue to check in with state agencies as well as local governments to see how they're doing on their response rates. That's just one item that I think is important for us to do as the Public Records Council. So I'm sure there are many other options and opportunities for us to not only reflect on what we've done, but what more we can do. And so I think it's important that we do this sort of annual retreat, for lack of a better description, and so that we can brainstorm what we've done well, what we can do better, and what we need to be doing. But unfortunately, I don't know if we can necessarily nail down a date at this time. Perhaps what we do is we shoot for a November meeting, Todd. If we have to push it out, I don't want to push it out because then we're going to get tangled up in holidays. As you know, once we get into late November, we have only a week or two before we run into a whole bunch of other holidays. So if we could shoot for perhaps a mid-November date. I think that that probably makes the most sense in reviewing the legislative calendar. I would say, though, the general election takes place on November 8th. Veterans Day is November 11th, and Thanksgiving is the 24th. So if we can squeeze something in there somewhere, I don't think we have to avoid the general election. We should be avoiding Veterans Day, but it seems to me that that's a pretty clear month that we should potentially target.
Mark, this is Michael. That makes sense to me, and I'm seeing a lot of other nodding heads from the people who are on camera. So,
all right. I don't think we need a motion for this. Todd, do you think you have what you need for that agenda item?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just do you want to throw out a date?
Yeah, I can throw out a date. Why not? Let me just look. What is today?
Yeah, it's super helpful to have these things scheduled in advance. Thanks for thinking that.
Let's make this one for November 17. That would be a Thursday. What, from 1 to 3 o'clock?
Mark, if I may,
Yes,
is it possible we could try 12 to 2, or is that too early for people?
No. I'm fine with that, Todd. I'm just randomly picking a date at this point.
I don't want to impact other schedules, but if that's not a big problem, that'd be easier for me.
Later is generally better for me. How about that Friday?
Friday the 18th?
So 1 to 3 Friday the 18th.
Ideal. 1 to 3 can work, yeah.
I actually have down for the 18th a PrAC legislative subcommittee, so that actually might take care of half of us. So why don't we plug that one in right there, because I think half of us are available, or at least it's on our calendar, Todd.
Great, I'll get out an invite for that.
Terrific. All right, so folks, our retreat meeting, just to review, will take place from 1 to 3 on November 18th. All right, moving along. Any other items you need to discuss on that particular agenda item, Todd?
No, but I think Steve has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Steve, please.
Steve, yeah, I was just remembering that, like, when we talked about this last year, I think part of it was a suggestion from Molly that we should be thinking on a longer time horizon with our planning and our goals. And so maybe that's something to think about going up till November, is like, can we think, like, what is our 5-year wish list? I mean, that's, long and in the scheme of PrAC membership terms, but I think it's a good idea.
I'm sorry, this is Mark. Todd, in preparation for that November 18 meeting, I think it might make sense for us and for any volunteers who may be willing to join is potentially have a brief meeting or breakout to discuss potential agenda items for that meeting in advance, so that we can share the key questions that we want to pose to members of the PrAC, things of that nature. I don't want us to necessarily come into that meeting all cold. I do think that we need to put some thought into topics that we want to discuss and potentially recommend. So I do think that it might make sense for us to consider even potentially creating a small subcommittee. I don't want to get too formal and take a lot of time from people, but for the example that I provided of the survey, I think is one topic that I think we ought to consider discussing. But I'm sure other folks on the PrAC are ex officio members who may have some thoughts as well, can chime in on what we can do from a short-term and long-range planning perspective. So those are just my thoughts, but I don't want us to necessarily just all walk in out of the cold into that type of a meeting without giving some forethought to what it is we and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Forgive me, I mistakenly hit my mute button there. I probably should just keep it on for the rest of the meeting because I'm talking far too much. Thoughts, please help me. Todd, please.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's great. I suggest we just people kind of put on your thinking caps and keep in touch over the summer with ideas. I try to maintain a running agenda for our full meetings that I just add stuff as it comes up. So as people want to share ideas, they could be listed as potential agenda items to discuss. Then maybe we could have a battle of the ideas at our retreat. Someone puts up a big whiteboard and we just start writing stuff down and we kind of hone in on what we want to focus on moving forward. But yeah, I suggest everyone just keep in touch and just avoid violating the meeting minutes, public meetings law by talking about it, with others.
Here's an alternative. Rather than creating a subcommittee and doing something informally outside of our regular meeting process, I anticipate, honestly, folks, that we're going to be meeting at least twice before this November 18 meeting. That's just my personal feeling at this point. Despite the fact that those meetings will largely be focused on legislative matters, I would perhaps make a suggestion to Todd that we keep this as an agenda item for our upcoming meetings so that we can have an open discussion about it if folks have ideas about that retreat meeting that can be incorporated into that particular agenda. I don't know if that makes sense, but it certainly would avoid the necessity of convening yet another meeting of the group. And I know everybody's time is valuable, so I'm trying to just figure out the most efficient way to get to the finish line without taking up people's time. Does that perhaps make sense? I got one head nod from Steve, a sort of one from Todd, and a full one from Emily. So I'm going to take that as, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, and just, obviously, it seems to make sense to do both channels, right? If you've got an idea, shoot it to Todd. Let's save some space on the meetings to talk about it as well. Great, thank you.
Perfect. All right, we'll dispense of agenda item number 4. Todd, are you comfortable with that? Looks like it. I got applause there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
all right, agenda number 5, reports on the work of the legislative and non-legislative subcommittees. I'm going to ask Emily and Todd, the two chairs of those two subcommittees, to please take over and allow me to rest my vocal cords. Thank you.
Emily, if you'd like, I can go first because my report's going to be much shorter.
Sure, go for it. Thanks.
Well, this is Todd. I'm reporting on the work of the non-legislative subcommittee, who we've met several times already, but unfortunately have not been able to advance our work significantly. Early on, we did decide to focus as an initial project on creating model advice for public bodies that need to either create or update their public records policies. Mark? Oh, sorry, I thought you were gesturing to me. And we really were hoping, or at least I'm hoping, and I believe the subcommittee members are too, to make it sort of a soup to nuts type of advice that is not exactly pie in the sky, but really focuses on the spirit as well as the intent of the law to create a wholesome public records fulfillment process that allows actual useful engagement with requesters and allows records to be provided in as least costly and timely way as possible. To effectuate that work, we decided to bring in testimony and break it up into different subject groups. We've only managed to hear from one panel so far from OHSU, DEQ, and the Portland Police Bureau on how they handle How do they create, receive, protect, and disseminate personally identifiable information, which we think is, an important topic that public bodies regularly address and sometimes hangs up the public records fulfillment process. At this point, we need to reconvene and set subsequent dates and figure out as a subcommittee how we would like to proceed. Does that mean, do we want additional testimony, or do we want to proceed directly into trying to write some sort of model advice? So I'd say we're probably a little bit behind where our legislative subcommittee is at the moment, but we will be moving forward trying to figure out sort of conclusive next steps to create something of value to state and local public bodies. Steve Suo is co-chair of this subcommittee, so if he has anything to add, I'd welcome him to say something as well, but otherwise I would say that is my report at this time.
This is Steve. I would say excellent summary, Todd. I think it's all very accurate.
Thank you, Todd. Before I forget, and Emily, I'm just going to take a prerogative of the chair again. Todd, I just realized I think we are missing something from the agenda, despite the fact that we kind of approved the agenda, and that is our bylaw subcommittee.
Yes, Mark, you are correct. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's put that down lower on the agenda. We'll get to that because I think a lot of people are anxiously awaiting Emily's report. And so, Emily, I'm going to ask you to take it away, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to take notes right now because it's hard for me to do that and talk, but there's a report that the subcommittee, I put together on behalf of the subcommittee, and it's posted to the website as a report. We've been doing some great work. I really commend everybody who's on the subcommittee for all the attention that you've paid to the witness panels that we've had, and all the good questions, and the real spirit of open exploration for ideas on how to tackle some of the problems, which we haven't really clearly defined as what we want to really address in legislation, but it's been a very wide-ranging and informative number of sessions. We've met 7 times since last December, and we heard oral testimony from almost 24 witnesses and got written testimony from 1. That included 1 session of open mic to the public where we had 4 or 5 people speak. We spoke to about a dozen employees of 8 different agencies, ranging from including the city, county, and state level. The types of agencies have been legal offices, police agencies, correction agencies, the DEQ, health, the Department of Health, and Department of Human Services. We've heard from 2 working journalists, a lawyer, a lobbyist, and 2 members of the public at large, as far as from the requester community. So we've heard a great deal more from the custodian community within Oregon and the requester committee, but good information all around. We've learned a lot about how different agencies handle different things, although some themes are emerging of similar concerns and hopes. We've also, thanks especially to the efforts of Steve Suo and also Todd Albert, heard from people outside of Oregon. And I should say many people were instrumental in putting all these panels together. We heard from 2 deep experts on the federal FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and how that differs and how that is similar and what might be useful to Oregon. As we look at it, we heard also from 2 states, and we were hearing from a 3rd tomorrow. We heard from folks in Kentucky and Oklahoma. And we'll be hearing from a couple of people from Connecticut, really explicitly looking at both costs of public records and how they're managed in the states, but also a concern that we've heard a great deal from in the custodian community of requests that become overly burdensome and how to manage those. There's also been a number of very useful research items that have been put together. Those are linked. Almost all of these are, I believe all of them actually are on or will be on the PRAC website, and there's a couple of them linked in the document that encapsulates the summary of what I'm sharing right now. Senator Thatcher was very generous and helpful in asking the Legislative Research Office to compile a review of all state laws on public records costs. And so although nothing crystal clear emerged from there as a perfect model, we were able to understand a variety of ways that groups of states deal with issues of cost, and that was really helpful. We also were able to access some groundbreaking research on the use of the access, who is accessing public records at the federal level, data that isn't available at most state levels. So that was very insightful. And of course, we referenced the work that the Public Records Advocate Office did in 2018-19 to survey agencies in Portland as well. A number of issues and ideas have surfaced, and those are listed in this report, just in bullet point, not just an overall sense type of things of what's come up. One thing we all do agree on pretty wholeheartedly, it seems to me, is that providing public records is a very important part of democracy, and that seems to be kind of a core starting place that we all came to the discussions about, which I'm really grateful for, and it's something I of course share. Our next steps, we meet tomorrow, and we're going to hear, like I said, from two witnesses from Connecticut. Interestingly, it is one from the requester community, a member of the Society for Professional Journalists there, and then someone from the, I believe, Steve, it's the Connecticut Freedom of Information Coalition. They have a very robust commission there, and we'll hear about how they deal with requesters that where the requests become onerous from the custodian's point of view, and some ideas on how they manage that. It is something that the journalist community there signed off on. So someplace, another state at least, has found some common ground. And I'll just finally, I'll note that tomorrow we're going to try to kind of go around the room and start identifying what individuals on the subcommittee heard in the testimony, what stood out to them as, again, as I mentioned before, as trying to define the problem, sort of step one, and then we'll continue that in probably the subsequent meeting to crystallize the problem and then start brainstorming about solutions. And we have voted to ask Todd to take the first stab at putting ideas to paper in some form that we hope will eventually, evolve into a legislative concept that we can all get behind, and then a bill, and then a law. And the last thing I'll mention is just that the full witness list of the people that we heard from is included in that subcommittee report. It's divided by within Oregon and without or outside of Oregon, and by in alphabetical order by last name. So I'd be happy to take any questions about that, or Todd is the subcommittee chair, and like half the people in this Zoom room are on that subcommittee. So if anybody wants to add anything, please feel free. Thank you.
I'll just echo my vice chair for my subcommittee. Good job, Emily. You got it all.
Looks like Mark has his hands up. I think Emily's catching up on her notes.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, please go ahead, Mark. Sorry, I wasn't realizing I was supposed to call on people.
No, that's quite all right, Emily. Thank you for the report. And I do want to share a little bit more with the members of the council who aren't necessarily on the subcommittee, as well as members of the public and our ex officio members, about the reasoning behind asking Todd to do this sort of initial draft. We have stakeholders from various sectors who serve on the PRAC, and it was my belief, and I think I was able to convince both Emily and Todd of this, that we wanted, at least from my perspective, a neutral, knowledgeable person to put together a straw man that we could begin to discuss. And in thinking through this, the only obvious choice to do that work, at least to me, was Todd. And I just wanted to share a little bit of background as to why Todd was asked to do this. It's not like he doesn't already have enough to do, but considering that he had just hired his deputy as well as another assistant, I felt that he might be able to do this extra work despite not having anticipated it. And he graciously agreed. And so, Todd, I want to express my appreciation to you for your willingness to do this. I know it's not a small job. Actually, it's rather Herculean from my perspective. I wouldn't necessarily want to be stuck with that. So I wanted to express my gratitude to you for your willingness to take that on. Thank you.
This is Michael.
Yeah, Michael, please.
While we're throwing gratitude around, I also just want to thank Emily for the work she's done and on that committee and putting together all the stuff we had. I know you had help, but you were definitely have been the leader of that group, and you've kept us on task and moving forward, and it's been wonderful.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It is a team effort.
Any questions for Emily or Todd? All right, at this point in our agenda, I believe we reserved some time for the public. And so for those of you in the public, if you would like to make, or if you would like to address the PrAC, we would welcome your comments. We would like to try, if we have more than a couple speakers, we'd like to limit you to 2 minutes, but we are generally generous with the time. So at this point, I would open the meeting up to the public, and if you would like to make any comments, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I'm by phone.
Please identify yourself for the record and share with us your comments. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my name is Scott Forster, and I wanted to make a request that you allow for public after both the bylaws subcommittee and the Sunshine Committee offer their report, so that myself and anyone else can comment on those presentations.
All right, Mr. Forster, then you're suggesting or requesting that you have an opportunity to make public comment after the discussion by the Bylaws Committee and the item number 9. I'm inclined to do so. So unless there are others from the public who would like to make a comment, we'll proceed on to agenda item number 6 with the understanding that the public will be given a brief opportunity to comment after those 2 previously identified agenda items.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hearing no other requests by the public for comments, move on to our next agenda item. Agenda item number 6, public, oh, excuse me, my Roman numerals are off. Agenda item number 7, reforming the bylaws subcommittee. I obviously overlooked this agenda item. I'm glad that it is on there. Todd, you do fantastic work. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Who's going to be reporting on this agenda item?
Hey, Mark, it's Todd. I guess I could get us started if that's okay. So as you might recall, the Bylaws Committee subcommittee was created at the same time as our other 2 subcommittees, and Scott Winkles, our former city representative, offered to chair it, even though his term would be ending later that year, because we formed these subcommittees in October and his term ended at the end of December. I don't believe they ever had the opportunity to meet, and therefore the PrAC remains without any bylaws to help govern its operations, and therefore I am recommending to this full council with your approval that that bylaws committee be reconstituted to move forward and create such a subcommittee or create bylaws for this council.
Is that a motion, Todd?
Yes, yes, it is. I am
We have a
moving.
motion. We have a motion on the table to convene a bylaws subcommittee for the purposes of establishing bylaws for the PrAC. I will second that recommendation. Is there discussion?
Yeah, this is Michael Crone. I think obviously this is a good idea, but I wonder if we want to wait until we have our full membership confirmed so that we can assign some of our newbies who are not already on other subcommittees to an additional subcommittee. Sorry, newbies.
Todd?
I mean, you're always welcome to solicit their opinion, Mark, to see if, should they be confirmed, would they be willing to serve? Not to put anyone on the spot here. However, it couldn't hurt to at least have that discussion with them, assuming they will be confirmed but not committing to what they are.
I'm of the opinion that personally that we've been lacking bylaws for some time, and this is a housekeeping matter that does need to get addressed. I don't think that we should be delayed by the business of the Senate, despite the fact that it is a very august and powerful group. I think that our work needs to continue. And I'm confident that our nominees will be confirmed, and they are more than welcome to join any of the subcommittees that of their own choosing at any time once they become a full PrAC member. And I expect that within the next 24 hours. Emily?
It's Emily. You just said what I was going to say, that the vote is supposed to be tomorrow per notes in the chat. So 24 hours. Yeah. So I think we should, I think we should go ahead and create this subcommittee, and yeah, maybe we could hear from Emily and Scott now as to what they'd be interested in. You're always welcome at the legislative subcommittee. That meets tomorrow, and it'll be really interesting. But I think we should go ahead and make the committee, but maybe could we hear what Emily and Scott are potentially interested in joining? Maybe we could make some plans.
This is Scott. I'm game for joining the bylaws subcommittee, and as to the other two, I'm open to either if there's a need or a suggestion as to where I could be plugged in. Happy to go in either direction, if that helps or not.
This is Emily Gothard. I would be interested in joining both the legislative and non-legislative subcommittees.
Well, it sounds to me as though Scott wants to be on the legislative and bylaws committee, and Emily wants to be on the legislative and non-legislative committee. That would work. And folks, you know, we're sort of an informal group here. I'd like to try to at least give the semblance of informality. And so there's nothing that prevents you from participating in any of the subcommittees, either as a guest or as a member of the full PrAC. So I do encourage both of our newly minted members, starting tomorrow, to explore all those subcommittees. Your insights and your experiences, I know, will be of value to any of the subcommittees. And so I would encourage you to think of maybe two of those subcommittees as a potential membership opportunity. I do value both of your opinions, but I'm personally very interested in seeing Scott on the legislative committee. And Emily, I do believe that you've got some keen insights that would be helpful to our non-legislative committee as well. So Emily, is your hand still up? okay, I just want to keep checking, making sure I'm not missing anybody. Todd, it seems to me as though we ought to move forward with the bylaw committee, unless I see any objections at this point. It seems to me as though we do have a motion on the table. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead,
Mark,
please.
I know there are some members absent at this meeting, but is there, can we go, I mean, can we see if there's other interest in the bylaws committee so that it's not committee of one?
Yeah, Steve, I wasn't necessarily going to, I was going to take up the idea of who should be on that. What I'd like to do at this point is establish the committee, but not necessarily the membership yet, if that makes sense. I'm more than happy to take volunteers, but what I think we need to probably do is send an email out to all the members of the PRAC to gauge their interest and willingness to serve on this newly constituted subcommittee so that nobody is missed. If that makes sense, I'm of course open to better ideas because I certainly don't have them.
Well, do we not have the committee at all anymore just because it's got vacancies on it, or isn't the committee still in existence from the last time we made it?
That's a great question, Michael. Todd, do we have a list of who had volunteered for the bylaw committee prior to Mr. Winkle's departure?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do. I will endeavor to find it. Oh, no, wait. Oh, here it is. Okay, I'm going to pull it up now. So we had Scott Winkles, Molly Woon, who's not present today. Stephanie Clark, State Archivist, is appearing on her behalf as the Secretary of State's designee. Tony Hernandez and Senator Thatcher. It was a small subcommittee to begin with.
Yeah, it was. All right. I think that let's establish the bylaw committee first, folks. All those in favor of establishing the PRAC bylaws committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any of those opposed? Okay, hearing no opposition. Todd, we have a list of those who volunteered previously. What I would like to do is ask that you send out an all points bulletin to the members of the PRAC as well as the ex officio members. I know Senator Thatcher had volunteered previously, but circumstances may have changed for her since that time. I'd like to send out a solicitation to the membership to become members of the bylaw committee. And we can hopefully do that through that process rather than taking up much, if any, more meeting time. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Sounds good, Mark.
Great. Just want to make sure everybody's copacetic with that. Thank you. And I think we've resurrected the bylaws committee. So thank you, everybody, for that. And we'll move along now to item number 8, training and mediation update.
Mark?
Todd, please
Excuse
take
me,
it
Mark.
away. Oh, yes,
Excuse me,
Steve,
Mark.
sorry. Steve.
Didn't we agree to have public comment right after this
Oh,
item?
we did, Steve. Thank you for being our parliamentarian here.
Wait, I think they wanted to, my understanding was they wanted to hear all the other items before commenting. That was what I took from the comment. And
Well,
specifically, he mentioned me. So the Sunshine Committee report was one of the things he wanted to wait for too.
Well, I believe Mr. Forster also mentioned the bylaws committee, so I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair and check in with Mr. Forster to make sure we're not upsetting the apple cart here. Mr. Forster, did you have public comments on the bylaw subcommittee agenda item?
Yes, if I could, and still comment on the Sunshine Committee when that happens. Is that okay?
I will give you that opportunity. Thank you.
So the Apple Card is fine. The bylaws, good luck, and I'm looking forward to it. I just perused the PRAC web page. I didn't see any past minutes or agendas for the bylaws subcommittee posted. So perhaps if we could get those up, whatever form they're in, would be appreciated. I also don't see, as an aside for the future of the Sunshine Committee having been posted. Perhaps they don't have anything yet. But that's it, other than, good luck.
Mr. Forrester, thank you for your comments. I do believe that our meetings from October 2021, Todd, is that correct? Listed the various individuals who agreed to serve on the subcommittees. If my memory serves me correctly, I just want to make sure the record is correct here.
It does, Mark. If I understood Mr. Forrester correctly, he was referring to agendas and meeting minutes from the bylaws subcommittee itself. So just to clarify, they never met. So even though it was agreed to in October that subcommittee would be formed and who its membership would be and who the chair was, they never actually met. So there are no minutes and no agendas posted because there are none.
Mr. Forrester, does that answer your question?
It does. Could there just be a placeholder on the web page to basically state that that was the case, that the committee was appointed, but that there were no meetings, so that anyone looking at the minutes can, not think that they're missing?
We'll reflect in today's meeting that the bylaw subcommittee never met, and that we have reconstituted the bylaws committee at this time.
Thank you.
If that meets your satisfaction, Mr. Forrester.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Moving on to our next agenda item. Steve, thank you for that check. I probably will need you to do that for me again after during item number 9. Todd, training and mediation update, please.
Thank you, Mark. And if I may, before I get to that, I do have a couple of slides to share with everyone. But before we discuss that, I do have some other news to share with the full council. So the first is I am pleased to announce, as I did recently in an email, that the office does now have a deputy public records advocate. I am pleased to welcome Yufeng Lo to the office. She's an attorney who's been in practice in state government in Oregon for the entirety of her career so far. I feel very privileged to have her. And if you would indulge me, Mark, I'd like Yufeng just to say hello and offer a few words to introduce herself. So Yufeng, go ahead, please.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me? There I am. Hi. I already introduced myself to, I think, the legislative subcommittee when they last met. But as someone pointed out, now that I am here, that frees up Todd to do some other important things, and I am happy to serve that role, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Yufeng.
Welcome, Yufeng. We're really excited that you've joined the team. I know that Todd has been in desperate need of assistance, and I'm certainly more than delighted that you are able to help him out, and we'll look forward to working with you and meeting with you as time moves along. Todd?
Thank you. And I will say I'm not only happy to have a deputy, I'm very happy to have Yufeng in the role as deputy as well. So again, welcome. The office does now have an intern as well. Big news. Maxwell Eli, actually a student, an undergraduate student at the University of Oregon from Emily's journalism class. I did a training for them some time ago, and Maxwell expressed a lot of interest in the work and followed up with me about some sort of way he could be of assistance. And he is currently performing a website audit to try to make the website as welcoming and engaging as possible, and will then utilize what he's learned from that audit to also turn his attention to our PowerPoint trainings that, of course, are quite dense and quite long and cover a very large and broad and often ambiguous area of the law, and utilize his skills and interest and experience to try to punch those up a bit as well. He's working 5 hours a week through the summer, and I'm very happy to have that assistance as well. And I'd like to think because it took so much work to hire an intern. Essentially, we had to create a position for him within state government, figure out what that meant, what he should be paid, et cetera, that we've now laid the groundwork for future successful interns in the office as well, because I have a great interest in utilizing further students or anyone else who wants to be part of what we do here. So welcome Maxwell, although he's not present in today's meeting. So now I will move into the information that I'm actually here to present. If you'll give me a moment to share my slides, I'll give you an overview of the work that's been happening in the office since our last meeting. Maybe. I think it's loading. Yes. So hopefully you can all see these slides. Is that true? Okay, great. So I'm going to give you an update on the request for assistance that the office has received and the trainings it's conducted over the course of the office's entire life for request for assistance and the trainings provided since our last meeting. So I thought this would be a helpful illustration for you. The office opened its doors on April 25th, 2018, and right off the bat, we started receiving requests for assistance, which is what I call requests from either requesters, including the media, or records custodians to informally mediate disputed public records requests. And I say informally because although the office has the ability to compel alternative dispute resolution at the state level, that has not yet actually occurred. And I think the reason that has not occurred is that once you move into the alternative dispute resolution process, it's way more adversarial than this shuttle diplomacy that the office undertakes working with both parties to disputed requests. Parties tend to lock into their respective positions and are less likely to mediate or compromise to reach some sort of solution. And so instead, we've had a lot of success helping, as you can see now, hundreds and hundreds of requesters and record custodians in individual disputes. And so we got off to a roaring start in 2018 with 101 requests. 2019, we were up to 187 as word of the office spread. 2020, up until March, I was seeing more requests for assistance on a weekly basis than the office had ever seen before. And I suspect, but for the COVID pandemic shutting down a lot of our work, we probably would have topped 200 requests in that year. 2021, work started to pick up again, and we hit our highest numbers to date at 192 requests. And even though we're only halfway through the year, as of last week before the Memorial Day weekend, we were already up to 103 individual requests for assistance. And I'd say at this point, we're about 110. Now, I should mention that I'll often receive calls or emails from both parties to a public records request. One day I'll hear from the records custodian that's trying to figure out how to get these records out, and the next day the requester themselves will give me a call. And those are not noted as individual requests for assistance. Those are considered just one. And so therefore, if you kind of break down those numbers, not to mention people who have follow-up questions or related issues they want to discuss, our numbers would probably be a lot higher. These requests for assistance also generally don't encapsulate requests to draft or update the public records policies of state and local public bodies. I consider that important work and an extension of our statutory mandate, but I don't necessarily log them as individual requests for assistance. And so let's move on to trainings. Now, these are the trainings that have been conducted just since our last full council meeting in October. And as you can see, there's been a fair amount, 10. I would say probably prior to COVID, we would have had more trainings at this point, but I think a lot of public bodies are still sort of trying to get off their back foot and just reinstitute normal proceedings. So I get a lot more, instead of overall trainings, I answer one-off questions, I handle requests for assistance, we do policy development, but a lot of public bodies sort of haven't had the bandwidth to have us come in and do full-on trainings for staff members, but I'm hoping that picks up again. You can see I have one booked in August, and the summer tends to be a busy time for training, so I'm hoping I'm going to hear from other public bodies as well. One thing that I haven't done a lot of but want to do more is trainings to the requester community as well. And so now that UFANG is on board, a long-term project that we're going to work on is how best to reach out into the community, especially with a diversity and equity lens, and make sure that all of Oregon's various communities are aware of the public records law, what it could do for them, and what is the most effective way to access this information from their government. So I'm hoping at my next report, I'll be able to add more community trainings as well as public body trainings. So that's the information I have to provide today, but I'm happy to answer any questions any of you might have as well. Thank you.
Questions? Steve.
Todd, this is really great. I see why you need a deputy, and in particular you, Fang, as a deputy. Can you sort of characterize the any patterns in terms of the type? Like, are you seeing certain leading causes of disputes, and what are the typical outcomes? Whether it be like just a negotiated smaller ask, or just give us some. Can you put some meat on the bones for details like that?
Sure. And frankly, Steve, because we've seen so many requests, it truly runs the gamut. But of course, the most common issues are fees, timelines, and exemptions, as well as, that's really the sort of the big three that come up in every way possible. I'll get a request from a public body, and they simply won't know what type of information they're permitted to turn over or not. And I'll deal with a requester who has asked for any and all of information related to the topic they're working on. So much of the work is about sort of managing expectations, explaining to both sides sort of what they should or shouldn't expect from the process, and encouraging communication so they can work together and actually get information out that they otherwise wouldn't. Like, for instance, I constantly find myself telling requesters, you are not limited to one request. So depending on your timeline, why don't we start with as concise and narrow and pinpointed a request as possible to get you information quicker and cheaper so that you could start getting the records you need. Or with public bodies, explaining to them that yes, while certain aspects of your information may be exempt, reminding them of their duty to segregate information. So as easy it is to say, it's sort of those big three topics: fees, timelines, and exemptions. It truly is every sort of issue under the sun and every variation of that, whereas I might simply be telling one side or the other why they shouldn't or shouldn't be expecting what they want, all the way up to negotiating the release of records by teaching both sides about the law. And you would think I'd be able to talk about this better or more concisely, but it's so broad in terms of what we see that it really is any scenario you could think of. We've probably already seen at this point in the office's 4 years of life. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's kind of how I can encapsulate it at this point. Oh, Mark, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's quite all right. I get ignored at home too. So, Todd, this is fascinating. Those numbers really are somewhat, I guess, surprising and yet not surprising, I suppose. What I'm interested in learning are the outcomes of these. And so have you been able to quantify the outcomes of these? I know that you've shared with us the graph of the number of requests for assistance that you've received, but there's nothing really there on the outcomes. And I'm curious to know whether or not that information is being tracked, and if so, are you able to share that with the committee? I think that that's an important question because it may lead to potentially some new ideas as well, or new approaches to addressing some of these challenges. And for the PRAC's benefit, I do want to share that state agencies and cities are required to engage with the PRAC when a request is being made. I believe I'm fairly accurate in that assertion. However, there are also a set of public bodies who did not necessarily volunteer themselves for this process. It's maybe something that we want to discuss at a further time. But I'm also curious, Todd, whether you're getting requests for services from those three outlier type local governments. That would be special districts, counties, and school districts. can you provide any insight to us on those topics, Todd?
Sure. And just to clarify, Mark, you said the PRAC, but I assume you're talking about their requirement to engage with my office.
That's what I meant. Forgive me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I figured, and that's fine. So with cities, they have the ability to opt in to the formal alternative dispute resolution process. I cannot compel them the way I could attempt to compel a state government. Even if a city said they wanted to participate, then chose not to, I can't make a finding of bad faith against them. That only exists at the state level. So it's definitely a tiered system where there's direct statutory authority related to state and city agencies, and none as it relates to any other public bodies, so counties, special districts, school districts, etc. And so, and as I've said, fortunately, we haven't had to go this sort of formal litigious route. And so what I found is that I have really good engagement with all public bodies in Oregon at the state and local level, regardless of what type of government they are. I'll often tell a public body or a requester in the midst of trying to mediate a dispute, you are not required to talk to me, but I believe I can be helpful as, someone who's not a party to this dispute. And more often than not, I've had a few public bodies say, wait, who are you? Can you tell me your website? And when I'm introducing myself to a new public body, I always make sure to say, I'm a state employee, I'm an attorney, this is the role that my office exercises, and that none of them are compelled or required to work with me. But no, Mark, I've had really good engagement, I'd say at all levels, not only when I contact a public body about a disputed request, but that they more and more are contacting me for assistance as well, which I think is a measure of trust that this office has gained with public bodies, that it can be a neutral arbiter of these disputes. But in connected with that, and to your earlier question, the office is not specifically tracking outcomes for a variety of reasons. One is that, frankly, this office has been in crisis mode almost since its inception or since it opened doors. And so I use a very bare bones tracking system to note public bodies, requesters, the issues faced, and sort of what was done. I'm in discussions with UFing because we do want to make this a little bit more sophisticated to maybe include additional information about what's happening. But, I was on my own for a very long time, and I just wanted to get down who I was helping. And I know you're not, accusing me of anything.
No, that is far from the intent behind that question, Todd. I know that I know better than most that you've been running a shoestring operation, and I do not fault you for not, documenting the outcomes of every darn case that lands on your desk.
But yeah, I was going to add to that for you.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it also would be very difficult in some respects to track an outcome, because for a lot of the disputed requests I handle, the final note I would write is offered this advice to that side, or offered this advice to both sides, or provided these resources, or public body agreed to release this amount of documents. But then I generally exit the conversation at that point, and unless I hear back from the public body, the requester, or both, as I sometimes do, I don't necessarily know what happened after that. And so it's sort of like a hard thing to track, but I do want to get more concise and detailed in what I'm noting, because I am a fan of big data. I think big data can reveal a lot. Trends are really important. And so with feedback, time, and resources, hopefully we can sort of improve these metrics for sure.
Yeah, Todd, just to if I may, Steve, I'll get you next here. I do think now that you're getting some help on board, and I don't necessarily expect a revolution to take place in your office in the next 36 hours, but I do feel it's going to be important for us to have some sense of the outcomes of these, whether or not it's, these people are reaching out to your office, right, for assistance. After that assistance is provided, a customer service survey or something of that nature might be something that your office considers. I'm just spitballing here, Todd, but it would be helpful, I think, for us to get an understanding of the cost savings that your office is responsible for avoiding litigious outcomes. That's just one aspect. You're also creating more transparency and faith with the public, knowing that there is somebody there to assist them in trying to get the information they're seeking from their government. So I hope that, and again, I don't expect this overnight, but I hope that that is a part of your future work plan, because I do believe that that is really critical data, not only for us as PRAC members, but also for the legislative body, who at the end of the day is the one who's funding your office. And I think that it's really critical for the office to show why investing in your office is so critically important. And that's just my selfish view of the world, perhaps, but I think it's a relevant one, and something that I hope we can work towards in the future. I'll be quiet now. Steve, you're up.
Yeah, I agree with all of what you said, Mark. And I also see, the difficulty of tracking these things all the way to the end. I was just going to suggest, if you're not already doing it, Todd, I mean, when you sign off with these folks after you're giving them advice, do you give them sort of a gentle invitation to, like, let me know how it all turns out? Send me an email.
No, I pretty much have a mantra for everyone, like, follow up as needed. Let me know how it turns out. Keep me posted. And I always offer training and policy development as well. It's just sort of like my standard. I should make it part of my signature at this point, but absolutely, Steve. And thank you both, because that's very good feedback from both of you.
And if I may, I did have one more question. You had mentioned a third area, which was deadlines. And I'm wondering what's coming up with, what are the issues that are coming up with that, and what are the resolutions?
Yeah, sometimes it's as simple as a requester will say, I submitted this request, I got initial acknowledgement, and I haven't heard back, and whether or not it's within the timeline, if it seems like the public body is taking longer than it should, or simply not answering the requester's communication about what's taking so long, or isn't keeping them posted as they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's as easy as just reaching out to the public body and saying, hey, this request has been submitted, you're not keeping in touch. Can you update the requester on the estimated date of completion and what the issues are? Have you communicated with them to try to make the request more narrow? And just trying to get both sides to talk to each other. But generally speaking, when it comes to deadlines, it's more from the requester side that I'm hearing that they just haven't heard back, or they have heard back but still don't agree that it should take as long as the estimate says it's going to take, and they want to know why. And so sometimes it's merely explaining sort of what the requirements are under the law, or the difficulties of the public records request, particularly when it comes to email. But sometimes it's about talking to the public body to get them to communicate with the requester, update them, or agree to work with me to figure out how they can sort of provide those records quicker.
Great, thank you.
Todd, does that conclude your report at this point? I want to just check if there are any other questions at this point. And I know I may have interrupted you, so I don't want to interrupt you anymore, but would want to field any additional questions if you have any at this time.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any other additional questions. It's important to mention to the council as well that the office has begun the budget build process, which is the first time the office will be sort of carrying that water to the legislature to advocate on its own behalf for a budget moving forward. I have several deadlines coming up this month, next month, and over the summer to get like the numbers in and the line items that we need, one of which will be emails for PRAC members. So that you will finally have access to state-issued email addresses. Mark doesn't seem happy about that, but I think it could be a measure of good housekeeping to make those available to those who want to use them. Obviously, some of you may not find it fruitful, but especially for records keeping purposes, public meetings purposes, etc., I don't think it could hurt to have those available. Mark?
I have already 3 email addresses, and a fourth is just going to mess me up even more. Todd, just so you know, I archive all my PrAC-related emails just as a matter of due diligence, and I would recommend that the rest of the members of the council do as well. You, just as a quick reminder, you are now a public body, and as a result, you are subject to the public records law and the state archive requirements. So just as a gentle reminder, folks, for those of you who are a formal member, you will want to maintain those communications. I certainly understand, though, Todd, why you would want to move over to a state email address for each of the members, just to ensure that records retention is being done automatically. Okay, yes. Todd, well, please go ahead.
No, I was going to, so just the last thing I wanted to add is as part of the budget build process, the office will be submitting a POP, a policy option package, requesting 2 additional full-time staff members. The way those positions are envisioned, one is an office manager who could do a lot of the day-to-day administrative stuff that I am currently doing and free me up to focus on the more substantive work of this office. And that position would have the ability to interact with the public at a sort of basic level. So with initial requests, they could sort of set up files, get documents, ask opening questions to get the work going. And then the other one would be the title I've come up with is Public Records Analyst. They could help with longer term projects, data collection, trend analysis, white papers, et cetera, to further expand the reach of the office and its ability to assist on sort of these bigger, more systemic questions. What will happen in the legislature, who knows? DAS put forth the same POP in the last session under their budget for the office, and it wasn't approved, but we're going to take another crack at it. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Todd. Are there any questions for Todd?
Steve.
Well, Todd, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I know I've talked a lot too, but I was just going to note as an aside, the Connecticut folks that we're going to hear from tomorrow, they have a Freedom of Information Commission, which is somewhat similar to the PrAC. They actually adjudicate disputes. They also have a staff that are effectively like Todd, only there are 12 of them. So I think this budget ask seems pretty modest, especially given that Connecticut has a smaller state budget and smaller population than we do.
Well, I would just say that it sounds like Oregon's doing a pretty darn good job if they're having to invest that much in their public records advocate. Todd, you're doing the work of 12 people, so good job.
Thanks. Although now only 6, so it's getting better.
Yeah, still.
Well, it's not fair to you, Fang. I'll take 7. She can be 5. Okay.
Well, great work, great report, Todd. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to see that. I'm especially grateful for you to your annual pilgrimage to the SDAO annual conference and helping our membership of 950 districts be more cognizant of the requirements of our public records law. So thank you for that report, Todd. Next agenda item, watching the clock at the same time, we are well within our time here. So the report on the work of the Sunshine Committee. Michael, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Michael Crone. And I'm just going to give a brief update on what the Sunshine Committee has been up to. In response to Mr. Forrester's early comment, I just want to clarify that the Sunshine Committee is a separate committee from the Public Records Advisory Committee. It's not a subcommittee or other subgroup. The Sunshine Committee actually has its own webpage, it has its own meetings, it has its own subcommittee meetings, and the sort of strange history of why we ended up with 2 public records bodies with some definitely overlapping jurisdiction goes back to 2017, and the desire to have a comprehensive review of public records exemptions, and I think just some resistance among some of the advocates who are pushing the Public Records Advisory Council as a legislative concept to sticking this council with that work. So the Sunshine Committee has, as I said, it has overlapping authority in the sense that its mission isn't technically confined to public records exemptions, but it also has a very specific task of reviewing all of the more than 500 now public records exemptions that have been enacted in Oregon over the last 4 decades or so. So the committee has been relatively focused on that task to date, and the specific areas of exemptions that it's been looking at most recently are trade secret and sort of proprietary business information records. And the general recommendation that the committee advanced there was that the legislature needs to create more clarity around how the trade secret exemption is supposed to work, and that the legislature needs to do a better job of putting the onus to protect supposedly proprietary business information on the businesses that are asserting the information is secret. This is one of those weird circumstances, really, where public bodies get things from outside and from businesses that they're doing business with typically, and the public entity may not really even know or care, frankly, whether the information that it's been given is really something that the business entity protects or really needs to care about. But business entities tend to assert that, and it just kind of puts then the public body in this weird position of holding something that someone else really wants and another person really doesn't want disclosed. And so the recommendation is to clarify how that's supposed to work, but also to put more of the onus on the actual business if it intends to protect its information. After looking at those issues, the committee turned and has been looking at family law related exemptions. These are exemptions related to a lot of things related to young people who are taken into custody for dependency reasons, young people who may be taken into custody for delinquency reasons, but also things around like adoption and foster care and child support. So just generally looking at the category of exemptions that relate to those areas. And we are expecting, I think, to have a recommendation on those at our next meeting, which is in the middle of June. It's Wednesday, I want to say June 16th. Oh, 15th is a Wednesday. So anyone who's interested in hearing that, tune in there. And our next agenda item for exemptions is exemptions that relate to physical and mental health records. So records that are in government custody that may pertain to individuals' health or mental health. And, there are some obvious things I expect we'll be looking at in that context that came up also in the family law context, which is kind of an overlay of federal law and complexities with that, along with obvious privacy interests that I think, need to be weighed carefully and balancing any potential right of public access. So that's kind of the immediate work of the group. The other thing that I want to say about what the Sunshine Committee has been up to is that our new chairs, the Sunshine Committee has moved to a co-chair structure, and our co-chairs have been working with the DOJ's legislative director in an effort to try to encourage the legislature to view the Sunshine Committee as a place where people who want to propose new exemptions from public disclosure are expected to have stopped along their way to the legislature, so that if you have a concept and you want to make public records exempt, the Sunshine Committee's vision for itself anyway is that legislators will then ask you, well, did you go run this by the Sunshine Committee, and what do these stakeholders think of what you're proposing? And so the chairs have been working with our legislative director to try and do some outreach to hopefully move in that model. We were, all of us, feeling a little bit daunted maybe that the legislature keeps enacting new exemptions, even as it has asked us to review all of the existing ones, such that our task felt like it was growing under us. And that's basically what we've been up to at the Sunshine Committee. Mr. Forrester, if you need any information about where its website is or anything, I'm happy to. Oh, look at that. Stephanie Clark already put it in the chat, but I think he's on the phone, so that's probably not helping Mr. Forrester too much. But if you Google the Oregon Sunshine Committee, that's honestly probably the easiest way to find it. And all of our meeting materials are up to date, I believe. And if they're not, happy to look into why they're not and fix that.
Before we get to Mr. Forrester, I'd like to entertain questions from the council. I have one quick comment, and just would like to share that. It's interesting, Michael, you know, when back in 2017, we sort of saw the PRAC as sort of the same type of arbiter, if you will, for legislative concepts. It never really happened, of course, and that's just the way it is. I'm glad to see that the Sunshine Committee is trying to take up that mantle, and all I would say is good luck with that. So, you know, I know that Representative Power probably has some thoughts on that as well. But nevertheless, I see Steve has a question. Steve.
I was just wondering, Michael, with kind of asking or encouraging legislators to make a stop at the Sunshine Committee. I'm wondering, I don't know if Cameron is here, but I'm wondering if the Legislative Counsel's office maybe has like kind of a roadmap that they give to legislators, like here are the steps you need to follow, and whether, even though it's not required, whether that could be included there or something, or is that something you've already talked about?
Can I just clarify, Steve? I don't really mean that legislators need to come to the Sunshine Committee. I was really more thinking about advocates who are proposing policy. Like, obviously, legislators are going to enact the laws they want to enact, but you know, they typically are getting a lot of their ideas anyway from community advocacy groups, and the hope is that those advocacy groups will come to the Sunshine Committee and sort of use the built-in stakeholder group. Obviously, there's no way to enforce any of that, but in some substantive areas of the law, that is kind of an informal expectation that legislators have. I think, you know, if you want to propose a change to the state's workers' compensation program, for example, there are groups that you need to have talked to before you come into the building with a bill, or you just kind of get redirected there. So it wouldn't be like a formal legal requirement by any means, and nor would it be something we would tell legislators that they're in any way required to do, but just hope that legislators view us as a place that advocates should have come before the advocates come to them.
I see Miles has popped in. Miles, please.
Yeah, we do not set any standards or rules or tell anyone what they can and can't do with laws. We simply draft them. We do not get involved in anything of any form of how they form the opinions, what they do, what steps they go through. We just draft.
So long as it's legal.
Yes. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm sorry. I guess I was thinking something more informal, like, you know, during new legislator orientation or something. Here's a resource that you could look to, you know.
Yeah, we don't do that.
No. No, I think we're trying to take care of that, and I think that's really that's on the on the committee and the committee's leadership, and to get legislators to see us that way.
I would say, though, Stephen, I don't know the answer to this, and we may want to ask LPRO on this. I know that LPRO provides issue briefs to legislators on an extraordinarily wide variety of topics. Whether or not they include public records in the list of issue briefs that they've produced over the years, and I believe that they literally run into the hundreds. There may very well be a issue brief on public records. I personally have not seen it, but I know that there are a number of issue briefs for legislators that are generally directed to newly elected legislators so that they can familiarize themselves, at least from a broad perspective, on various topics. However, whether public records is a topic that's included in those issue briefs, I can't tell you. We would probably have to reach out to LPRO for an answer to that. Any other questions on this topic for Michael? I know that Mr. Forster would like to address the council, but I want to make sure that the members of the PRAC have had their opportunity to ask Michael any questions. Okay, Mr. Forster, if you are still with us, you have 2 minutes for any comments regarding this subject topic.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the Sunshine Committee, yes, I did find the website. Thank you. I frankly didn't know that the Sunshine Committee existed, so, great. It looks like the minutes are up to date as of September of 2021, so suggestion they might catch up on their minutes and agendas there on the Sunshine Committee's website, Department of Justice. In terms of today's meeting, thank you for Mr. Chairman, for moving the comments behind the reports. I think that makes sense, and I appreciate it. I don't know where this goes, but just as a general suggestion, I would like to maybe see if the PRAC could discuss in the future about public bodies voluntarily, or with a suggestion, post, let's say, the most popular documents, minutes, agendas. A lot of times there's reports. So if you're in a city, there could be a development report or a water utility study, or if you're a special district, a bus transport study, often paid with public funds and maybe very important. And sometimes these documents last 10 or 20 years in terms of being relied on. Why shouldn't they just be automatically posted instead of having a request or multiple requests over years or decades even, just to get that original base document? I'll use an example, a local city here in the Multnomah County, they post the minutes of their city council and some of the committees, and then after 1 year, they take it down. So there's no institutional historical knowledge that people can self-service, even though there's over 100,000 people in the community. On the other side, there are entities in Multnomah County, such as the Multnomah County government, and they have minutes going back at least 15, 20 years, including videos. So there's this big difference there, and maybe you guys could address that. Maybe it's just best practices and not a rule. On the email address for Todd being provided to the members, may I humbly suggest that the PRAC members actually all accept the state email address, so that you can set a best practice for many of the hundreds or even thousands of public bodies in the state, if you include advisory councils and other voluntary committees, because the public records law doesn't make a difference. I did write a comment, let's see, it's on the PRAC website, related to the emails back on January 13th, 2022. It's posted with my name, Scott Forster. Basically, this is directly related, so thank you, Todd, for initiating that. But instead of the PRAC members deciding whether or not to keep their private emails, I think it would actually show better if you all accepted the state email, and then actually then use that, and then you could tell others that's a practice that we're doing. It allows for automatic archiving, and it also means that requesters are more likely to get responsive requests to, let's say, requests for emails from a member, as opposed to individuals having to go to their private email server or company, and then supposedly they have archived those, but maybe they didn't. So this takes away the onus from individuals that may or may not be knowledgeable of whether, how to, or even that they have to keep their correspondences as a public body. And it just pushes it to the public body itself that appointed or chose these folks here. So suggestion, actually keep the emails and everyone use it.
Thank you, Mr. Forster. Are there any other comments by the public? Mr. Forster, thank you for your involvement today. It's appreciated. We value your thoughts and your comments. Folks, next agenda item, I think we'll wrap up with agenda item number 10, members to propose agenda items for next meeting, which we haven't necessarily decided when that takes place. I saw Steve's hand go up quickly. Steve.
Well, I know that, probably the main focus of our next full prac meeting will be hopefully whatever the subcommittee has put forward on legislation. But maybe there would be time to discuss this very issue of email, since I don't think there's time to resolve it today. I will say that I agree with the sentiment, and I will be voluntarily taking a state email account. It's an additional layer of complexity, additional thing to follow, but I do agree that it's best practice, and maybe we can discuss formally whether we want to make it something we all do.
And Todd, please, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say we might have a lot of lead time into having to deal with state emails, because it's going to be a line item in my budget ask for next year, and I'm frankly a little unclear with DAST at this moment if they're trying to make that happen now or won't occur until I can pay for it. Regardless, it won't be happening soon, but I second Steve's thoughts. I think this is an important discussion that we should have. There are good reasons to have a state email, and there are ways to deal with multiple email addresses, including mail forwarding, etc. So I think we should put it on the agenda too.
Any other agenda items for our next meeting, folks? Okay, not hearing anything. We now have 6 minutes, I believe, for us to conclude our meeting. Actually, 4 minutes. Before we conclude, I'd just like to open the floor to any of the PRAC members for any additional comments before we conclude today's meeting. Emily.
I have already lowered my real hand. I just want to remind people that we do have this legislative subcommittee meeting tomorrow. I think it's going to be really interesting. The reason that we're hearing from these folks in Connecticut is because members' interest was piqued in what Connecticut's doing because of other testimony that we heard in this process. So it's something that people on the subcommittee wanted to learn about, and so Steve went out and found them. So we will, like I said, not be making decisions on what's going to be in the proposed legislation or anything like that. But if anybody who's here who's going to be there tomorrow, who's a member of the subcommittee, I would like you to come prepared to offer your insights, your thinking about, what's stuck with you in the testimony that you've heard, that helps you clarify what problem we should be attempting to solve here. And like I said, we will move on to solutions, of course, but we're going to try to start with that tomorrow. Thank you. And everybody's welcome, whether you're, of course, a subcommittee member or not. There will be time for public comment.
Thank you, Emily. Any other comments? Okay, folks, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. It was a great meeting, and really happy we were all able to get together, at least virtually, Todd, one other item that we probably are going to need to discuss in the not too distant future is when we will reconvene in person, or in a hybrid fashion or whatnot. Knowing that this bug is recirculating in a new form, and I'm a recent victim of it, as some of you else may have been. It may be a little premature to do in person, but it's certainly my hope that in the not too distant future, we'll be able to convene once again in person. I just want to throw that out there because I know we've been meeting for a good number of years now virtually. It's tough to do this kind of work this way. Getting in front of one another in person, I think, will go a long way towards hopefully helping us reach a consensus on the tough and difficult tasks at hand. So with that, I'll seek a motion to adjourn our, what is it, June 2nd meeting of the PrAC, please.
So moved.
This is Michael. I'll second.
Okay, I've got a motion by Todd and a second by Michael, all in agreement. Please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Today's meeting of the PrAC is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. We'll look forward to seeing you next time around. And for those of you, just as a quick reminder, on the PrAC subcommittee of the legislature, the legislative subcommittee meeting is tomorrow at 1 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.